I have spent the better part of my life walking among men who appeared, by every visible measure, to be finished, men whose fortunes had collapsed, men whose names had been struck from the registers of polite society, men whose health had failed them, whose reputations had been disfigured, whose families had turned away, whose enterprises had crumbled into the dust of the marketplace. And I tell you tonight, with the quiet certainty of one who has examined the lives of more than 500 such men and women, that I never once met a single soul whose situation contained no door, no window, no narrow passage through which the light of action could still enter. Not one. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve, and the converse of that law which few have dared to articulate is equally true. Whatever the mind can perceive as a possibility, no matter how small, no matter how distant, becomes the seed from which the next harvest is grown. There was a winter in my youth, I was perhaps 23, perhaps 24, when I sat across from a man named Edwin C. Barnes in a small office in East Orange, New Jersey. Barnes had arrived at the Edison laboratories some years earlier with nothing but a burning determination to become the business partner of Thomas Edison. He had no money. He had no introduction. He had no qualifications that would commend him to the greatest inventor of his age. He arrived in a freight car, dressed in clothing that would have embarrassed a beggar, and he announced to the inventor that he had come not to work for him, but to enter into partnership with him. Edison, by his own later admission, looked at the man and saw something most observers would have missed entirely. He saw a man who had already crossed the bridge of decision and burned it behind him. There was no retreat in Barnes. There was no plan B. There was, in the architecture of his inner life, only the one definite outcome and the long road that led to it. But the most remarkable part comes only now. Barnes was given the lowliest position in the laboratory. He swept floors. He carried equipment. He stood for years on the periphery of the great work being done around him. And to the casual visitor, he appeared to be making no progress whatsoever toward the partnership he had declared. And yet, in the silent chambers of his mind, Barnes was doing something. He was studying. He was watching. He was learning the rhythm of Edison's thought, the texture of his decisions, the patterns of his commerce. He was, though no one around him recognized it, becoming the man Edison would one day need. And when the moment finally arrived, when Edison developed the dictating machine and his sales force could not be persuaded to handle it, Barnes stepped forward and said simply, "I will sell it." He had been preparing for that single sentence for 5 years. The partnership followed. The fortune followed, the legend followed, but none of it would have been possible if Barnes had accepted, in any of those long, obscure seasons, the lie that there was nothing he could do. I have observed, in my long inquiry into the laws of personal achievement, that the human mind possesses a peculiar weakness. When it encounters a circumstance it cannot immediately master, it tends to collapse the entire field of possibility into a single declaration. There is nothing to be done. And this declaration, made silently and often without conscious awareness, is the most destructive sentence a man can pronounce upon himself. For the moment he accepts it, his definite major purpose grows dim, his faith grows brittle, his autosuggestion turns against him, and the great current of infinite intelligence, which flows through every life that remains open to it, is dammed at its source by the iron gate of his own conviction. The circumstance did not defeat him. He defeated himself by his interpretation of the circumstance. What I am about to tell you is the very heart of the matter, and I beg you to receive it not as a piece of motivation, but as a law of mind as exact as the laws which govern the orbits of the planets. There is no circumstance in human experience, none, in which the individual is wholly without action. The action available may be small, it may be invisible to others, it may seem in the moment to be utterly disproportionate to the size of the obstacle, but it exists. It is always there. And the man or woman who develops the discipline to find it, to perform it, and to repeat it across the long arc of difficult days is the man or woman who eventually walks out of every prison the world has ever built around them. Consider the mirror that the great lives hold up before us. Abraham Lincoln, the man whose face has become for us the very emblem of patient endurance, lost his mother in childhood. He lost the woman he believed to be the love of his early life. He failed in business. He was defeated in his first campaign for the legislature. He was defeated for nomination to Congress. He was defeated for the Senate. He was defeated for the vice presidency. He was defeated for the Senate again. By every conventional measure of a political life, this was a man who had been instructed repeatedly and by every available authority that there was nothing more for him to do. And yet, in each of those long valleys of apparent finality, Lincoln found something: a book to read, a speech to refine, a correspondence to maintain, a small kindness to perform, a single thought to clarify in the privacy of his own meditation. He was not waiting for the great hour. He was preparing for it in 1,000 small acts whose meaning would only become visible when the hour arrived. And when it did arrive, the man who walked into that hour was the man those small acts had built. The detail most people overlook is hidden right here. We tend to imagine, when we read of such lives, that the great achievers possess some special endowment of fortitude that we do not share. We imagine they were born with a thicker skin, a louder voice in the chambers of their inner conviction, a brighter flame in the lamp of their will. But I have studied these men at close range, and I tell you the truth. They were not different in their material. They were different in their interpretation of the material. Where the average man encountering the closed door said, "There is nothing to be done," these men encountering the same door said, "There is something to be done, even if I cannot yet see what it is, and my work today is to find it." That single shift in the orientation of the mind, that single refusal to accept the verdict of the circumstance, is the watershed that divides the two lives. I want now to speak directly to those of you who are sitting tonight in some kind of difficulty. Perhaps your finances have collapsed. Perhaps an illness has taken hold of your body or the body of someone you love. Perhaps a relationship has ended, and the room you are sitting in tonight is fuller of absence than of presence. Perhaps the work to which you had given the better years of your life has been taken from you. Perhaps you are watching, helpless as it seems, while a child or a parent or a friend descends into a darkness you cannot follow them into. Whatever the shape of your present difficulty, I want you to hear this with the part of yourself that still remembers what it is to hope. There is something you can do right now, tonight, before the sun comes up tomorrow. There is always something. It may not be the thing that solves the problem. It may not be the thing that lifts the weight from your shoulders. It may not be the thing whose performance you can announce to your friends or write down in the column of your accomplishments. But it is the thing that keeps the great current of your life from being dammed at its source. It is the thing that prevents the iron gate from being lowered upon the chamber of your possibility. It is the thing that keeps the line of communication open between your conscious mind and that vast, infinite intelligence which has, in every age and in every condition, found its way to those who refuse to declare themselves finished. What might that small thing be? I will not insult you by prescribing it. The action available to a sick man in a hospital bed is not the action available to a young woman whose business has just failed. The action available to a father estranged from his son is not the action available to a man whose savings have been consumed by a misfortune he did not foresee. But I will tell you what I have observed in those who found their small thing and did it. They began with the body. They washed their face. They straightened the room they were sitting in. They put on a clean shirt. They wrote a single page in a notebook, even if the page contained nothing but the date and the words, "Today I refuse to surrender." They made one telephone call. They walked for a quarter of an hour in the open air. They read a single chapter of a book that had once meant something to them. They prayed if they were inclined to pray, or sat in silence if they were not. They performed, in other words, an act of allegiance to the version of themselves that was still alive beneath the rubble of the circumstance. And here we touch upon one of the deepest and most poorly understood laws of the mind. The subconscious does not interpret your situation. It interprets your behavior in the situation. When you perform, even at the lowest ebb, an act of dignity, an act of intention, an act of refusal to capitulate, the subconscious mind receives that act as evidence. Evidence that you are still in the game. Evidence that the project of your life is still under construction. Evidence that the engineer has not abandoned the work site. And on the basis of that evidence, the subconscious begins slowly at first and then with gathering speed to assemble around you the materials of your recovery. The contacts begin to appear. The ideas begin to surface. The opportunities, which were always present but invisible to the eye of despair, begin to disclose themselves. The world has not changed. You have changed your relation to it. And because you have changed your relation to it, the world will, by laws as exact as those of physics, begin to change its relation to you. I once knew a woman in Cleveland who had lost, in the space of a single year, her husband, her home, and her health. She came to one of my lectures in the deepest condition of bereavement I have ever witnessed in a living person. After the lecture, she approached me and asked, in a voice that was barely audible, what could possibly be done for a woman in her circumstance. I asked her what she had done that morning. She looked at me with an expression of bewilderment. I had risen, she said. I had washed. I had come to this lecture. I told her, Madam, you have already done 3 things this morning that the woman who has surrendered would not have done. The woman who has surrendered does not rise. She does not wash. She does not come to lectures on the laws of success. You have, by the simple performance of these 3 small acts, given evidence to your subconscious that you are not finished. Continue to give that evidence in whatever small forms you can manage every day for the next year, and at the end of that year, you will not recognize the woman who is sitting in your chair tonight. What Hill said about this subject is deeply unsettling, and I will repeat it here in the form in which I myself have come to understand it. The circumstance does not write your life. Your interpretation of the circumstance writes your life, and your behavior within the circumstance is the ink. You may not be able to choose the page upon which you find yourself, but you are, at every moment and without exception, the one who chooses what is written upon it. This is not a metaphor. This is the operating principle of the human mind, and it has been confirmed for me in every life I have ever examined with the rigor of close observation. The modern man, surrounded by his comforts and his conveniences, has lost a great deal of his ancestral resilience. He has been taught by the prevailing currents of his age that the good life is a life without difficulty, that any difficulty which arrives is an injustice, and that the appropriate response to difficulty is either complaint or paralysis. This teaching is among the most damaging falsehoods ever circulated in the name of human happiness. Difficulty is not the enemy of the good life. Difficulty is the soil in which the good life is grown. The man who is never troubled is also the man who never discovers his definite major purpose, never cultivates his faith, never assembles his mastermind alliance, never drinks from the deep wells of infinite intelligence, and never finds out in the chambers of his own being what he was actually placed upon this earth to become. He has avoided the pain of growth at the cost of the joy of becoming. It is the worst trade ever made by a human soul, and it is made daily by millions who believe themselves wise for making it. Here begins the darkest game of the subconscious mind, and you must understand it if you are ever to be free of it. When the circumstance presses upon you, the subconscious offers you almost always a seductive whisper. There is nothing you can do, so there is no shame in doing nothing. This whisper is the great seducer. It promises rest. It promises relief. It promises the suspension of effort, the lifting of responsibility, the temporary anesthesia of the will, and men accept this whisper by the millions every day. They accept it because it is presented to them as wisdom. They accept it because their friends, who are also under the spell, applaud them for their realism. They accept it because the alternative, the daily, gritty, often invisible labor of finding the small thing and doing it, is far harder than the comforting paralysis of surrender. But the price of accepting the whisper is the gradual atrophy of the very faculty that would have lifted them out of their circumstance. The muscle of action, when it is not used, withers. The flame of faith, when it is not fed, dims. The connection to infinite intelligence, when it is not maintained by the small daily acts of allegiance, becomes faint and finally inaudible. And the man who has accepted the whisper finds himself, 10 years later, in a circumstance even more constricted than the one he originally surrendered to, and now he has not even the strength to question it. The real turning point begins here. It begins in the smallest possible act, performed at the lowest possible moment, against the loudest possible objection of the seducing voice. It begins when a man, lying in the dust of his own apparent defeat, lifts his head 1 inch, looks around at the wreckage, and says to himself very quietly, "There is something. I do not know what it is, but there is something, and my work today is to find it." That sentence, spoken honestly into the chamber of the subconscious, is the beginning of every great recovery I have ever witnessed. The sentence does not produce the recovery. The sentence opens the door through which the recovery enters. And the man who learns to speak that sentence in the lowest hours of his life, to speak it without expecting an immediate answer, to speak it as an act of allegiance to a future he cannot yet see, that man has learned the deepest secret of personal achievement. He has learned that he is not the prisoner of his circumstance. He is the author of his response to it. And the response, accumulated across thousands of small days, becomes, at the last, the life he was meant to live. I want now to speak of a paradox that lies at the very heart of this teaching, because no honest reflection upon the subject can avoid it. The paradox is this: the small action you perform at the lowest hour does not feel powerful. It does not feel adequate to the size of the difficulty pressing upon you. It feels very often like an act of foolish denial, a child's gesture in the face of an adult catastrophe. And the seducing voice will use this feeling against you. It will say, "Why bother? What is one small act against the size of what has happened to you? You are deceiving yourself with these little gestures." The honest response is despair. But I tell you that this is the most dangerous falsehood ever whispered into the ear of a struggling soul. The small act is not adequate to the difficulty. It was never meant to be. It is adequate to something else entirely. It is adequate to the maintenance of your inner life, to the preservation of your dignity, to the keeping open of the channel through which the answer, when it comes, will arrive. The small act does not solve the problem. It keeps you alive, in the deepest sense of that word, until the solution can be given to you. What the lives of great achievers have been trying to tell us for centuries comes to this: they were not stronger than us. They were not luckier than us. They were not gifted with some special grace that the rest of humanity has been denied. They were simply and stubbornly men and women who refused, in the lowest hours of their lives, to accept the verdict of the circumstance. They found the small thing. They did the small thing. They did it again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, often for years, often without any visible sign that the small thing was producing any result. And then one day the result arrived, not because the small thing had produced it directly, but because the small thing had kept them in the position from which the result could be received. Edison did not invent the light bulb on the day of his great success. He invented it across 10,000 failed experiments, each of which was a small act of allegiance to a definite major purpose he refused to surrender. Carnegie did not build his empire in the hour of his triumph. He built it across decades of small alliances, small studies, small disciplines, small refusals to accept the verdict of his early poverty. The great achievers were not different in kind. They were different in duration. They simply outlasted the seducing voice by the cumulative weight of 10,000 small acts performed against its persistent objection. If there is one thing I would have you carry away from this hour we have spent together, it is this: you are not at this moment in the situation you appear to be in. You are in the situation that your interpretation of the circumstance has constructed around you. The circumstance is real, but it is not final. Your interpretation is the part of the construction that lies entirely within your power to revise. And the revision begins not with a great inner declaration, not with a sweeping change of life, not with a dramatic announcement to the world. It begins with the smallest possible act, performed in the smallest possible way, in defiance of the smallest possible objection of the seducing voice. It begins with the cup of water you drink, the page you read, the prayer you whisper, the walk you take, the letter you write, the apology you offer, the kindness you perform when no one is watching. It begins with the silent declaration, made in the deepest chamber of your mind: I am not finished. There is something I can do. I will find it, and I will do it. And tomorrow I will find another, and I will do that as well. And in this way, day by day and act by act, I will build my way out of the circumstance that has presented itself to me, not by overpowering it, but by outlasting it through the patient construction of a self it cannot contain. I have lived long enough now to have witnessed with my own eyes the recovery of men and women whose situations appeared, by every measure I could apply, to be utterly without remedy. I have seen the bankrupt man become wealthy. I have seen the disgraced man become honored. I have seen the broken family restored. I have seen the abandoned woman find a love deeper than any she had previously imagined. I have seen the dying man recover, and the healthy man who had surrendered his inner life decline. And in every recovery I have ever observed at close range, I have found at the bottom of the story the same quiet ingredient. The man or woman in the lowest hour refused to declare themselves finished. They found the small thing. They did it. And the universe, which is not deaf to such gestures, eventually responded. I will leave you with this thought, and I ask you to sit with it tonight before you sleep, in whatever room you happen to find yourself in. The circumstance you are facing right now is not the final word about your life. It is one chapter. The pen is still in your hand. The page is still before you. And no matter how dark the ink of the recent paragraphs, no matter how heavy the weight of what has been written, the next sentence is yours to compose. You do not have to compose a magnificent sentence. You do not have to compose a sentence that solves the entire situation. You only have to compose one true sentence in the smallest possible form that says, I am still here. I am still working. There is something I can do tonight, and I will find it, and I will do it. And the morning will find me one small step further along the road than it found me yesterday. That is the law. That is the practice. That is the entire teaching, distilled into a form that any man or woman in any condition, in any hour, can apply. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But the conceiving and the believing begin with the smallest act of allegiance you can perform tonight against the loudest objection of the voice that is telling you nothing can be done. The voice is lying. It has always been lying. And the proof of its lying lies in every great life that has ever been lived against the conditions it pronounced impossible. When was the last time you sat in the lowest hour of your life and asked, not what has been done to me, but what is still mine to do? The answer to that question is the door through which your next chapter will arrive. And the door, I assure you, is closer than you think. It has been waiting all this time in the quiet chamber of your own intention for you to remember that it was always there. Find the small thing. Do it tonight. And let tomorrow find you one step further along the road that no circumstance in this world or any other has the power to close to the soul that refuses to declare itself finished.